But I also find right now that, and I'd love to know what you think about that, that the idea that somehow by multitasking we are speeding everything up and we are more productive is not at all the case. That I remember my mother, just before she died, being really angry with me because she saw me opening my mail and talking to my children at the same time. And she actually said in a Greek accent, which was even stronger than mine, if you can believe it, I abhor multitasking. And I sort of hear her voice now as I'm aiming towards unitasking. And don't you think that unitasking can be part of the slow movement?
I think very much so. I wonder, is there a Greek word for have we North Americans inflicted it on the rest of the world sometimes? I think. I think multitasking is very much one of the great myths of the fast forward culture. This idea that somehow we are hardwired, we are able to juggle intellectual tasks more than one at a time, when that's simply not the case. And all of the cutting edge leading brain research, now that we're able to peer inside people's heads and see what's going on and measure it and benchmark it against what those people are achieving in the real world, it's very clear that multitasking doesn't work, that the human brain is simply not equipped to cope meaningfully and productively with more than one stream of information at the same time. I mean, you simply cannot do your tax return and read Tolstoy at the same time. It just can't happen. And yet, in the same way as the human body just cannot run a 1-minute mile. I mean, yet we carry on with the assumption. I mean, our society has built itself around the assumption that multitasking is not only possible, but it's laudable. And the only way that multitasking could work is that if we as human beings had experienced in the last, 10, 15 years, a great leap forward in evolutionary terms, which, anyone who knows anything about evolution knows that hasn't happened and can't happen. Who knows, maybe thousands of years from now, we'll be able to watch, admin and do our tax return at the same time with equal levels of productivity. But that's not the case now. And it's a worrying trend, especially since it's something that gets fobbed off on children a lot. We have this notion floating around that there's a new generation of kids out there, the digital natives, that they're somehow different biologically, chemically, spiritually from the rest of us, that they are hardwired, that they are able, that they need to do these things at the same time. But that's not true. It's simply untrue. And I mean, all of the research shows that, especially kids, the way that the brain develops, it's in fact children who suffer more from multitasking, because the bits of the brain that allow us to move between tasks, not doing things at the same time, but actually toggling back and forth between tasks, those things, that part of the brain develops even later than adolescence. So we're caught in this peculiar bind where we've swallowed whole the idea that multitasking is a good thing, when all of the research, and I think all of the anecdotal evidence as well, I mean, most of us can feel in our bones that it happens in everyday life all the time. You're checking your BlackBerry while you're trying to fry some eggs and you burn the egg. These things happen to us all the time, yet we ignore the signals and reach for another slice of multitasking.
Carl, we have lots of questions, and so I'm going to text question and then come back and ask you some more of my own. But let's have a text question.
Sure.
So women and moms are so busy, and many like it. How do we do what we need to do and slow down? That's from Kelly Skoloba in Pittsburgh.
Yeah, thank you very much for the question. And it's a question that comes up around the world. It's not just an American phenomenon. I think in some ways women are on the front line when it comes to juggling and being overwhelmed by tasks and things to do. And it's interesting that Kelly mentions that people are busy and that they like it. And I'm not standing on a soapbox and saying you must never be busy. There are lots of wonderful things to do, and I'm all for people being engaged and excited and leading meaningful and fulfilled lives. But I think when you start to skim through your life, when you're sort of scratching the surface, you're not doing anything well, you're exhausted, I think those are the signs that you need to put on the brakes. The question is, how do we do what we need to do and slow down? I think we all need to do, and I can't give you a a universal recipe for, I don't know, Kelly, I don't know the ins and outs of your life, but I think what we all need to do is sit down and do a kind of personal audit, if you like. And I did this myself, just sort of sit down and look at all the things that, even I wrote them down, all the things that I was squeezing into an average week. And they were all things that I felt that I needed to do, that I had to do, that I simply couldn't contemplate giving up. And then I put them in order of priority, what was really most important to me to what was least important. And I was amazed when I saw that list in the cold light of day, how many of the things at the bottom of the list weren't actually that important. I didn't need, and that's the key word there, I didn't need to do them. And I found it easy, in some cases less, to start cutting at the bottom. And that allows you then to devote more time to the things that you do really need to do. And I think what happens for many of us is we just get wound up, we paint ourselves into this corner where, and I felt this myself before I began putting on the brakes, I felt, how can I slow down? I mean, I need 3 more hours in the day to achieve everything that I need to achieve. But you start, I think when you stop for a moment and reflect and look, take a long, hard look at your life and what's really important to you, then you start to realize, I think most of us have some room to cut back. We have such a, just as a kind of extra thought on this, one of the problems, I think, one of the drivers of our roadrunner culture is that we have a profoundly dysfunctional relationship with time. And we misuse time. We see time as the enemy. We want to squeeze it for all it's worth. It's woven into our vernacular. We say, you snooze, you lose. The very idea of slowing down is associated with wasting time. But look how we use our time. I mean, nobody lies on their deathbed and looks back and thinks, I wish I'd spent more time updating my MySpace page, or more time in the office, or more time shopping, or more time watching TV. And yet those are the things that suck up the vast majority of our time. You know, what people really look back on, and I come back to the word in Kelly's question, need, what's really important, because I think we often end up prioritizing the urgent and forgetting the important. And I think what people really remember when they look back from their deathbed, and it's another way of saying what's really important, are the small, human, the slow moments. You know, that long lunch you shared with your grandmother in the backyard that went on for hours and hours a couple of weeks before she died. You know, you remember that long weekend you spent in Paris with your partner, or you remember the hugs and the warmth and the tenderness and the relaxed storytelling that you shared with your children in the evenings. Those are the things that you really remember. Those are the things that you really need.
I'm actually very glad that you brought up this. Recently, I've been thinking a lot about how ancient Greeks and ancient Romans kind of tried to bring death into their culture, not with a sense of morbidity, but in order precisely to give that sense of perspective and prioritizing and putting the important ahead of the urgent that you're talking about. In fact, as you know, ancient Romans would carve memento mori, remember death, on statues and trees, just to remind them of that reality. So what do you think about the slow movement kind of bringing back that recognition that this is, after all, the one absolute certainty in everybody's life?
I think that's very true, and it seems to me that death, mortality has become, in some ways, in our sort of warped thinking about how to use time and how to live, death has become the ultimate deadline, and it sort of pushes us into this deadline mode. I mean, you pick up any lifestyle magazine and there'll be a headline saying 300 places to visit before you die, or 50 books to read before you die, and it's constant. It's reinforcing this idea that the clock is ticking, that we're on the clock, and that the way to make use of that time, to get value for your time, I mean, that phrase, time is money, which has come to define every moment of our days, but it sounds so unbelievably modern, actually was uttered by Benjamin Franklin 250 years ago at the dawn of the industrial era, when a lot of these ways of thinking came into place. And I think that that kind of idea of mortality fuels our obsession with going fast, with doing too much, with putting quantity before quality.